Today, we're diving into a really cool idea from Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Tipping Point. Seriously, this concept might just change the way you look at everything, from how a pair of shoes suddenly becomes the next big thing, to how a massive crime wave can just vanish.
So think about it. How does that actually happen? How can something start super small with just a few people, and then all of a sudden, it's everywhere? Well, Gladwell says we should think about it like a virus, like an epidemic. And to really get what he means, let's start with a real-world mystery. Okay, picture this. New York City back in the early 1990s. It was a pretty bleak scene. In some neighborhoods, the city was just gripped by fear. At its absolute worst in 1992, the city had more than 2,000 murders. The subways were a mess, covered in graffiti, and crime felt completely out of control. It really seemed like the city was in a downward spiral with no way out.
But then, something totally unexpected happened. Over the next 5 years, the murder rate didn't just go down a little bit. No, it plummeted by almost 65%. Overall serious crime dropped by nearly half. This wasn't a slow, gradual change. It was a sudden, massive shift. So how? Well, the answer wasn't one single, giant solution. It was about a bunch of little things all hitting a critical point at once.
How in the world do you explain a change that big, that fast? Gladwell's big idea is that we've been looking at it all wrong. We shouldn't see it as just a social problem, but as an epidemic, an idea or a behavior that spreads from one person to another, just like the flu.
And at the core of every single epidemic, there's what he calls the tipping point. It's that magic moment, that boiling point, where everything changes all at once. It's the secret to how tiny, seemingly insignificant changes can lead to huge, sweeping effects. And he says it's all governed by 3 basic rules. Gladwell says these tipping points aren't just random acts of nature. Nope. They follow a predictable pattern driven by 3 rules: the law of the few, the stickiness factor, and the power of contact. If we can get a handle on these 3 things, we can start to understand how real change happens.
Okay, let's jump into rule number 1, the law of the few. Now, this is going to sound a little backward, but the idea is that a very small number of people are responsible for spreading almost every major trend. It's not always about what is being spread, it's about who is doing the spreading. For a perfect example, just think about Paul Revere's famous Midnight Ride. What most people don't know is that another guy, William Dawes, rode out that exact same night with the exact same warning. In fact, he rode even farther than Revere. But here's the crazy part. Revere's ride set the countryside on fire. Dawes' message, it pretty much went nowhere. Why the huge difference? Well, it all came down to the kind of person Paul Revere was. See, Gladwell points to 3 special types of people who kickstart these social epidemics. You've got connectors. They're the social glue. They know everybody. Then you have mavens. They're information sponges. They soak up knowledge and just love to share it. And finally, you have salesmen. They're just incredibly persuasive. Paul Revere, he was both a connector and a maven. He knew everyone from the rich merchants to the local farmers, and they all trusted his word. Dawes, well, he was just some guy. But, having the right messenger isn't the whole story. For an idea to really take off and tip, the message itself has to have something Gladwell calls the stickiness factor. It's got to be memorable. It has to stick in your brain.
Remember this old slogan? It's a classic example. Grammatically, it should be "as a cigarette should." But using the word "like" was just wrong enough that it got people talking, debating it, and most importantly, remembering it. For decades. That is stickiness. Okay, but what about something really important? How do you make a critical health message stick? Well, Gladwell talks about this study at Yale. Researchers wanted to get college seniors to get a tetanus shot, so they put together this booklet that described in scary detail just how awful tetanus is. And the result? After reading all these terrifying facts and figures, a whopping 3% of students went to get the shot. Just 3%. The message was urgent, it was important, but it just wasn't sticky enough to make people actually do something.
So then the researchers tried one tiny little change. For some of the students, they added a campus map to the booklet with the health center circled, and they listed the exact hours you could go get a shot. And boom, look at that. The vaccination rate jumped to 28%. That's almost a tenfold increase. And right there, that is the secret to stickiness. It wasn't about yelling louder or using scarier pictures. It was about making the information practical and personal. That simple map took the idea of getting a shot from some vague thing they should do and turned it into a specific, easy plan they could do. Okay, so you've got the right person spreading a sticky message. That's got to be it, right? Well, there's one more piece to the puzzle, and it might be the most powerful one of all: the power of context. This rule says that we are incredibly sensitive to our environment. Where and when a message spreads is just as important as the message itself. A perfect way to understand this is the broken windows theory. It's this idea that small, visible signs of disorder, things like graffiti or a single broken window that nobody fixes, send a powerful signal. That signal says nobody cares around here. And that kind of environment can actually invite more serious crime to move in. I mean, the influence of our environment is huge. Think about the famous Stanford prison experiment. You take a bunch of normal, healthy college kids and you put them in a situation where some are guards and some are prisoners. Pretty soon, the context became so powerful that it completely changed their behavior. The situation literally overwhelmed who they were as people. Which brings us all the way back to the beginning. Back to the mystery of New York City. Now that we have these three rules, the law of the few, the stickiness factor, and the power of context, can we finally figure out what happened? This is where it all comes together. This is where we can see how these rules don't just work in theory, but they combine to create these incredible real-world changes. The answer to New York's crime problem wasn't some massive, expensive program. It was all about finding the right, small levers to pull. The city's authorities, using the broken windows theory, focused on changing the context. They started small. They cleaned every bit of graffiti off of every single subway car. Then they started cracking down hard on people who jumped the turnstiles to avoid paying the fare. These weren't just small fixes. They sent a massive new signal. The signal was, someone is in charge and disorder will not be tolerated here anymore. By fixing the little broken windows, they tipped the entire system. And that really is the biggest takeaway from the tipping point. It's this empowering idea that the world isn't as stubborn and unchangeable as it seems. It shows us that if we're smart about it, if we focus on the right messengers, craft a sticky message, and pay attention to the context, even small actions can have enormous consequences. So the next time you see a trend just explode out of nowhere, or a huge shift in public opinion, you'll know what's really going on. It probably wasn't just one big thing. It was likely a series of small pushes in just the right places that found that tipping point. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? What will you tip?